Welcome to Morbid Whispers, where we explore the darkest corners of human history. Today, we're delving into a chilling tale from the streets of early 20th century Germany. It's a story of deceit, brutality, and the heinous crimes of a man known to many as the Butcher of Hanover, Fritz Haarmann. Behind his seemingly harmless facade as a street vendor and police informant, Haarmann hid a terrifying secret. With charm and cunning, he lured young boys into his grasp, only to unleash unimaginable horror upon them. His reign of terror spanned years, leaving a trail of tragedy and unanswered questions in its wake. Join us as we unravel the gruesome details of Haarmann's crimes, the methods he used to evade capture, and the shocking events that finally led to his downfall. This is not just a story of one man's monstrous acts, but a sobering reminder of how evil can lurk in the most unsuspecting places. So, brace yourself as we step into the twisted world of Fritz Haarmann, where innocence met a horrifying end. In the 1920s, Fritz Haarmann was known as a successful seller of secondhand clothes and was beloved by housewives for his endless supply of cheap meat, until they learned he harvested both of his products from slain runaway boys. The people of his native Hanover all thought Fritz was something of an oddball, but friendly and certainly harmless. Even the police liked him, and he worked for them as an informant while he carried out a horrifying killing spree right under their noses. Once his crimes were discovered, Haarmann became notorious as the vampire of Hanover, who killed his victims with a love bite that went right through the windpipe. Also called the Butcher of Hanover, he ultimately confessed to nearly 30 murders, but police suspected he killed dozens more. Born on October 25, 1879, to a morose father known as Sulky All, Friedrich Heinrich Karl Haarmann was doted on by his invalid mother. The youngest of six, he loved playing with dolls, wearing dresses, and avoiding other children, especially boys. In an effort to force his son to toughen up, All packed young Fritz off to the military school in the southern German city of Breisach at the age of 16. Although the boy enjoyed his time there, after just a few months at school, he discovered that he had epilepsy. Dismissed from school due to his condition, he worked in his father's cigar factory for a year before committing his first crime, sexually molesting young boys. Captured and charged by the police, he was consigned to a mental asylum. After just 6 months in the asylum, he escaped and crossed the border to Switzerland. While in Switzerland, he became engaged to a young woman named Erna Loert. However, the short-lived engagement fizzled when she got pregnant, and he returned to Germany in 1900 to complete his compulsory military service. Due to his epilepsy and probable mental illness, Haarmann was hospitalized for 4 months in 1901 and dismissed from the military in 1902. After his discharge, his father made repeated attempts to have him thrown back in the asylum permanently, but Fritz managed to evade him every time. After leaving the military, Fritz Haarmann first got by on his pension, which increased in 1904 when he was finally classed as disabled. Over the next decade, he supplemented his pension with petty crimes, burglaries, and cons. Unfortunately for the teenage boys of Hanover, Haarmann's crimes would escalate dramatically following the end of World War I. By 1913, the police were fed up with his repeated crimes and threw the book at Haarmann. Convicted of burgling a Hanover warehouse, he was tossed in jail for 5 years, allowing him to sit out World War I. In jail, Haarmann met 24-year-old pimp Hans Granz, with whom he fell quickly in love. Upon their release, they took up residence together. Paroled in 1918, as the German Empire was crashing spectacularly, he immediately took up 2 jobs. One was with a gang of smugglers. The other was as an informant for the Hanover police, a position that would play a huge role in his next project. In September 1918, 17-year-old Friedel Roh ran away from his home, disappearing into the back streets of Hanover. When Roh's father set out to find his son, he learned that young Friedel had been friendly with Haarmann, who often took young boys over to his apartment for a bit of fun. Yet when Roh's father brought this clue to authorities, police were reluctant to interfere with their most valuable spy. He persisted in his requests, and eventually, they agreed to visit Haarmann. There, they found Fritz Haarmann in bed with a 13-year-old boy, but no sign of Friedel. All they could do under the laws of the time was arrest Haarmann for indecency with a minor. Haarmann later pointed out that the police couldn't have searched too thoroughly. Friedel Rose's severed head had been tucked away behind the stove the whole time they were there. Fritz Haarmann was already well known as a black market butcher, popular among people of the area for his friendliness and his irresistibly affordable meat. By 1919, Germany was in dire economic straits, and many families struggled to keep food on the table. Throughout the early 1920s, Haarmann spent much of his time loitering around Hanover's train station, scouting for teenage boys to coax home with promises of food and comfort. Thousands of children were running away from home at this time due to post-war hardships, so he had plenty of victims to choose from. After feeding his victims, Haarmann would kill them by biting through their windpipes in what he grotesquely called his love bite, before sexually molesting their dead bodies. Finally, he would dismember them, grinding their flesh into sausage meat or chopping them into cutlets to be sold as beef or pork. After butchering his victims, he dumped their remains into the nearby River Lane. For 6 years, while the police turned a blind eye to their favorite informant's activities, Fritz Haarmann is believed to have murdered over 50 boys, often chosen by grands out of jealousy of some item of clothing of theirs. He became successful selling their clothes and their flesh, even as more and more parents descended on the city stalked by the vampire of Hanover, desperate to find their vanished children. In May of 1924, the police were forced to turn their attention to Haarmann when children discovered a skull on the banks of the lane. After several more skulls and skeletons were found, the River Lane was dragged, uncovering the bodies of at least 22 teenage boys or young men. The city of Hanover panicked, and suspicions turned to Haarmann thanks to his reputation for bringing runaway boys to his apartment. Due to his status as a favorite informant, the Hanover police were deemed unfit to investigate Fritz Haarmann. So, 2 detectives from Berlin arrived on the scene to take over the investigation. The Berlin detectives soon found Haarmann in a dark corner of the train station, attacking a teenager. He was thrown in jail while they went to search his apartment, much more thoroughly this time. Inside was a nightmarish scene. The walls and floor were stained all over with blood, while more than 100 pieces of victims' clothing were found. In custody, the vampire of Hanover was only too happy to confess to his crimes. When asked how many he'd killed, he casually replied 30 or 40, I don't know. Later, he said he probably killed between 50 and 70 boys. However, police were only able to identify 27 of his victims and were unable to find the dozens of others. Haarmann was charged with multiple counts of murder, and a trial date was quickly set. In court, Haarmann smoked cigars and insulted everyone present. Once, looking at a photo of one missing boy, he shouted at the boy's grieving father that he could never have had anything to do with the child as he was far too ugly. Found guilty of 24 out of the 27 murders he was charged with, Haarmann was swiftly sentenced to be decapitated by guillotine on April 15, 1925. His lover, Granz, who had often emotionally blackmailed Haarmann into murdering particular children, was sentenced to life in prison, but the sentence would later be commuted to just 12 years. After his death, Fritz Haarmann's head was preserved in formaldehyde and given to the medical school in Göttingen. In 1925, the remains of his victims discovered in the River Lane were buried in a mass grave in Stockener Cemetery. Though the people of Hanover were eager to get past Haarmann's horrifying murders, his crimes inspired the German expressionist filmmaker Fritz Lang's classic 1931 thriller M. In M, both the police and criminals in a large German city hunt for a serial killer who preys on young children. Fritz Haarmann and Hans Grand's grisly crimes had one other tragic effect, though. Although homosexuality was illegal in Germany at the time, it had been largely tolerated for some years. With the lurid stories of Haarmann's sexual violence and Grand's sickening cruelty, a wave of homophobia swept through the country. As the hearts of most Germans hardened towards the plight of gay men, the path was cleared for the later campaign of murder against homosexuals carried out by the Nazis. Hans Granz, however, survived to a ripe old age, dying in Hanover in 1975. Decades later, in 2015, the medical school in Göttingen tired of storing Fritz Haarmann's preserved head and cremated it. thus doing away with the last traces of the Butcher of Hanover. As our journey into the sinister world of Fritz Haarmann comes to an end, we are left with more than just the chilling details of his heinous crimes. Haarmann's story is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can reside in seemingly ordinary individuals and the devastating impact such evil can have on a community. The streets of Hanover were forever changed by his actions, and the pain of his victims' families continues to echo through time. The story of the Butcher of Hanover serves as a grim reminder that vigilance and justice are crucial in preventing such atrocities from repeating. As we close this dark chapter, we remember the victims whose lives were cut short by a man who should have never been free to roam the streets. May they rest in peace, and may we never forget the lessons learned from one of history's most terrifying serial killers. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey into the past. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the dark and morbid corners of history. Until next time, stay safe, and always be aware of the shadows lurking in the light.